Parcel!
Parcel?
Right, so what do we have here? Huh. Was kind of expecting something a bit bigger. With the series now in flux after the commercial and critical failure of Angel of Darkness causing the original studio to lose ownership of their own IP, it seemed that the good ship Tomb Raider was destined to sail into uncharted territory. But luckily for us, Eidos decided to hand the reins of the franchise over to their American studio Crystal Dynamics, who were previously known for their cult classic gothic fantasy series Legacy of Kain and Gex, the pervert gecko. But while they weren't the most commercially successful of titles at launch, they were still IPs that were competently made and beloved by a lot of people. So when it came to instilling confidence in the fandom, it's initially a bit of a mixed bag. Eidos would need to do something big, something really clever to help show to everybody that the series was in good hands and that there was nothing to worry about. And that one clever thing that they did to give new Lara and Crystal Dynamics the hashtag nerd cred that they needed was to hire the man that created Lara Croft in the first place.
I'm Toby Gard and I'm the creator of Lara Croft.
Yes, Toby Gard, the man who created one of gaming's most iconic and influential characters and left core design after the first game, was brought back by Eidos and Crystal to work on this new incarnation of the series. And as far as genius strokes go, this was possibly the best thing they could have done to win people over to their side. They got the man who famously noped out of Tomb Raider after seeing this sort of thing appearing in newsagents to come back and work on a new version of the series. He was given quite a lot of creative control of the project, acting as senior designer, creative consultant, and lead character designer. He also helped Crystal's team flesh out Lara's early animations, co-wrote the overall story, and also worked on creating the characters of both Lara and the rest of the cast. Then, after 2 years of development time, Tomb Raider Legend was born. But I'm getting ahead of myself. It's 2021, the world is still shit, and it's still being ravaged by the hipster version of the Spanish flu, so let's plug in our glorious escapism machines and take a look at Crystal Dynamics' first crack at the Tomb Raider series, Tomb Raider Shadow! Right, where were we? The first thing most players will likely see aside from the usual company logos is the loud, bombastic, bouncy-wouncy James Bond-esque intro, which showcases all of the main characters, new locations, and of course Lara's brand new modernized look. Its tone is very much a rapid departure from the previous game, and seems like a deliberate attempt to distance the series from Angel of Darkness as much as possible. Instead of the brooding, murder mystery vibes found in AOD, we've instead got a fast-paced showcase of glamorous locations and fancy acrobatics, full of smiling and smirking characters plastered all over the place. I have to say, if I was going to make something to demonstrate to the world/players that this was a brand new reimagined version of Tomb Raider, then yeah, I'd totally do something like this. I'm certainly feeling hyped to play it after watching it, that's for sure. We're at the main menu now, and already we're at yet another departure from the classic series. Previous games had the menu take up the center of the screen with either a static image or a short video sequence in the background to look at whilst you navigated the options. But here instead we have a menu bar on the left with a giant version of Lara just standing there, with her arms folded and looking like an Uber driver who's rung your front doorbell and is impatiently waiting for you to get up off your fat ass and answer the door. The menu's new look is slick and clean with a nice minimal digital design to it. Yeah, it lacks the character of the first 3 games menu system, and I really wish this makes a comeback someday, but it's effective enough at what it does. One massive positive thing that I can immediately say about this game is that they've brought back the Croft Manor level last seen in Tomb Raider 3, only here it takes on a slightly different function than before. Previously, Croft Manor has served as a glorified tutorial level of sorts to allow the player to get familiar with the controls and also contains some great secrets for more dedicated players to find. To an extent, this version still serves that same purpose. It also includes its own secret areas, collectibles and puzzles to solve that all count towards the game's final completion score. However, it does feel a lot more streamlined than the more freeform exploration found in the original Manor, but it's all packed with so many neat visual details that make exploring Croft Manor really quite enjoyable this time. Stuff like being able to see all the piles of clothes scattered around the floor of Lara's bedroom, or spying a circle of post-it notes in the corner of Zip's lab where clearly Lara's been up all night making research notes. It's just such a fun area to wander around and explore at your own pace, and the design of this mansion, whilst taking a few inspirations from the Angelina Jolie movie, is just straight up gorgeous at times. In fact, I think the main hall is pretty much a one-to-one recreation of the one from that movie. From the tech area being located at the end behind bulletproof glass, right down to this door just to the left of the stairway being in exactly the same place. The secrets you find are sadly just collectible relics to unlock bonus features, but are usually hidden in areas that require a bit of problem-solving or platforming to get to. Occasionally, you'll even get to open a hidden passage that leads to a completely different room, and it's yet more flourishes like this that help give this place a lot of charm and character. I was kind of disappointed that there were no Manor grounds to explore outside this time, so don't expect to unlock anything as awesome as a hidden quad bike track or an entirely new area full of Lara's trophies this time around. You also get to see what your comrades are up to whilst you're out tomb raidering, which is pretty neat, though you can't really interact with them outside of a few passing quips sadly, but they do sometimes react to your actions, which led to several moments of me trying to find new ways to wind up Alistair.
I suppose there's no point in my offering to help you get what you need in a less calamitous manner.
There is a weird caveat to all of this, however, and that is not being able to access the whole mansion until you've completed the game's first level, which somewhat negates the purpose of this being here as an option to begin with. I mean, why go back to the mansion to practice the controls and learn how the game works when you've already played the game and learnt how the game works, if you get what I mean. But it's still fun to have a pottle around regardless, and I'm still very, very glad that they've brought this element back to the series here. This, I know, is a very video gamey type of progression trope and all, but I find it kind of funny how bits of Lara's own house are locked out to her until she's been to another country first. Like, did she leave the key to her indoor swimming pool in Bolivia, or is Winston just like, no fun until you've done all of your chores first, young madam? But let's begin with playing the main game, and oh, multiple difficulty modes. Well, this is new. I think I'm going to be a true hardcore gamer here and select the Tomb Raider difficulty mode. I feel like I have the relevant experience needed to be able to breeze through this mode with no problem. Isn't that right, comment section? Please make it stop! The game begins with a cutscene that takes place in Lara's past. We see a private jet taking a young Lara Croft and her mother Emilia Croft back home after an excursion in the Himalayas. The two of them have a very cute discussion about how Lara thinks Yetis aren't such bad creatures, but are misunderstood giants who are only angry because it's always so cold.
I've heard they're rather fierce.
Yeti only look fierce. They probably don't like being so cold all the time. I shouldn't like it either.
You never have to be cold, my Lara, if you don't want to be.
As for that ravenous horn dog of a butler, lock him in the freezer for all I care. Of course, it doesn't take long for disaster to strike, and the plane's left engine bursts into flames and sets them on a crash course for the Himalayan mountains. The last thing we see is Emilia telling Lara to close her eyes before we cut to several years later, and our first shot of the more adventurous and grown-up Lara scaling a mountain without climbing gear. Once Lara makes her way around the side of a cliff, she dives off it to reach the nearby ledge, doing it in perhaps the most flamboyant and cocky way possible, of course. And she vaults up the ledge in the same way players could do in the classic games via the secret button combination. This scene is just such a brilliant introductory set piece and is pure fan service in the best way possible. Not only does it show a version of the plane crash detailed from her original backstory, albeit with alterations, but this scene finishes with her using a move that classic fans would instantly recognize. It's perfect. It's Crystal's way of showing us that this will be a different Tomb Raider game, but not so different that it nearly loses all of its identity. That wouldn't happen until 2013. It's also here we're introduced to Lara's new companions who accompany her through most of the game via her snazzy new Bluetooth headset. This is another element that was adapted from the Angelina Jolie movies to fit in with this game's universe. Now, instead of being totally isolated whilst tomb raiding, Lara Croft has access to a team of experts to give her useful information. Sometimes it's information to do with the environment that she's in, or other times it could just be nonsense banter between them, which sort of acts as a light version of character development for them. Some people have said they didn't like the amount of radio chatter that's in this game, but I honestly didn't mind it at all too much, and I actually feel it adds a lot of charm to this game.
Yeah, Lara, howdy, waiter.
for the most part at least. Yeah, remember Zip, that hacker character from Tomb Raider Chronicles' divisive VCI building chapter?
Yo! Jimi Hendrix is back!
Well, he's back in this game and he's Lara's personal tech expert. And he actually manages to avoid being a complete stereotype in this game.
Oh, hell no!
Okay, I sit corrected. The other voice on the end of the line is from Alistair, who is Lara's wimpy historical expert, and spends most of the time being all posh and British about everything and seems to live in a constant state of anxiety. He's kind of like the human version of C-3PO.
Identical to what? What sword? He said you've been to Paraiso. What happened there? And who's Amanda?
Of course, it would be remiss of me to talk about everyone new to this game and not bring up the leading lady herself. For this new rebooted version of Lara, there's a new voice talent behind her, and this time it's actress Keely Hawes, who some of you may know from the BBC TV spy series Spooks, or the time-travelling police drama Ashes to Ashes. Personally, I consider her portrayal of Lara to be the definitive take on the character. Where Shelley Bond set the standards for others to follow and Jo Noel Elliott refined it further, I feel that Keely Hawes really took the role and made it shine here. She has this ever-present sense of effortless class to her, which I find really intoxicating, and the way she always manages to walk the fine line between being playful and threatening with people makes her an incredibly compelling character to watch. That's not to discount the quality of the performance from the previous voice actors at all. It's just that I feel that this performance is where the character really started to evolve past the one-note persona and become a little bit more nuanced. Once that's over, we get given control for the first time and have a small area to explore to get used to the game's new control scheme. If there was something that I really wished Angel of Darkness had, it would be this game's control scheme. My god, does this game feel like a breath of fresh air to play. Tank controls were perfect for the level design of the PlayStation 1 games, but for a full 3D environment like this, you really can't beat a full 360-degree movement and 3D rotating camera control scheme. Jumping no longer has a slight delay to it and happens instantly once the button is pressed, and ledge grabbing now happens automatically when approaching one. Unfortunately, in this game you can't turn this grabbing feature off, but for the most part the auto-grabbing works as intended and allows you to easily and quickly navigate through levels. You also have the ability to speed up certain actions like climbing and shimmying by repeatedly tapping the triangle or Y button on the controller. Thankfully, none of these actions are tied to a stamina system. In fact, there's no stamina bar to worry about at all here, so you're free to move about at your own pace with pretty much no penalties whatsoever. You're also introduced to other mechanics like vine climbing, rope swinging, which is thankfully leagues better than before, and using equipment like Lara's new PDA, torch, and binoculars. And there's also the inclusion of environmental interactions like being able to kick around small objects. Take that, you tiny rock bastard. A short while later, you learn how to pole swing, encounter your first enemy, complete a small physics puzzle before then being introduced to the new addition to Lara's arsenal, the Maltese Falcon. I mean, the magnetic grapple. There are even environmental hazards that you can trigger to take out groups of enemies at once, though the way that they've been implemented in this game feels a little bit obnoxious to me. The first time you encounter these is later on in the first level, where you see a bunch of rocks just sitting on top of a slope, conveniently ready to be kicked off and rolled into a couple of guards that happen to be patrolling below. With the small rock tutorial from earlier in the level, you'd be thinking that they were setting you up to be able to just go up to this and kick it over. But nope, instead you get shown this obnoxious looking button prompt, or warning triangle in the PC version, which indicates that you instead have to shoot it. You don't even have to worry about aiming or locking onto it with the left trigger, as a simple button press will just instantly snap Lara's aim to that object regardless of her physical position. On paper, this is a good idea, as being able to quickly shoot an object mid-attack is certainly really helpful. However, in practice, it almost feels like the game is giving you a press X to win button. Instead, what usually happens is the player will see this symbol appear and just usually press the corresponding button without any much thought or regard to what it is they're actually doing. It feels similar in a lot of ways to something like a QuickTime event, which is appropriate because they are also here in this game in abundance too. Usually they appear in a small cutscene where Lara is going about her business and suddenly she's thrust into a situation where she has to think on her feet to avoid dying. The first of these occurs after you've taken out some goons and solved the game's first big puzzle. Lara triggers a trap, and to avoid dying, all she needs to do is trust that the unseen, omnipotent force controlling her every move isn't having an off day or has gone up to take a piss, and presses the right button in time. I've never really been a fan of QuickTime events in games. With the possible exception of Shenmue and Resident Evil 4, most games with QTEs that I've played have never really felt like they added much to the overall experience. Yeah, they're not too offensive here and I get what they were going for, but all these serve to do is just remind me that we used to be able to play these types of scenarios ourselves. The tomb itself is actually quite enjoyable to navigate through, even with the constant team chatter. In fact, one thing this game does really well, it's environmental design. Tombs feel awe-inspiring and spooky, and the more urban environments are full of detailing that really help bring them all to life. There is one downside, however, and a few of you may already know what I'm about to say here. You may have noticed whilst watching this video that the levels I've been playing through have almost had a corridor-like quality to them. Well, that's because the majority of this game's environments are extremely linear when compared to the previous games, which had a more free-form style of exploration to a lot of the levels. This is a much more streamlined experience this time around. It doesn't offer much in the way of diverging paths to explore, but is instead designed to keep the player constantly moving forward. This means this time the experience feels way more fast-paced and action-focused than before, and is more akin to playing a Tomb Raider movie than a Tomb Raider game, if that makes any sense. A common complaint that people often have with this era of Tomb Raider games is that it feels both like the logical continuation of the series, but also like a slight step down for it at the same time. Things like having to find keys or other items in the level to unlock doors or combine with parts of the environment to progress are instead replaced with object manipulation and physics puzzles. I can't confirm this to be true in any way, but I feel that all this was likely done to cut down on the more obtuse and frustrating moments from previous games, where players could potentially waste lots of time aimlessly backtracking to work out what to do or where to go next. But the problem is, that's kind of Tomb Raider's thing. Sure, backtracking is annoying sometimes when done incorrectly, but being able to freely explore levels in a non-linear way and at your own pace was what made Tomb Raider feel unique. A new addition that really highlights just how much this game tries to appeal to a more casual audience this time around are the RADnoculars. Yes, they are rad. An item that lets you scan your surroundings for objects of interest, and conveniently highlights them with a bright colour which causes Lara to say something about how to potentially use them. Not only does this take away all of the subtlety, but it feels like the game is pretty much telling you the solution to the puzzle and leaving little for you to be able to work out for yourself. I'm aware this may make me come across as hypocritical, especially with my previous comments regarding certain puzzles in Tomb Raider 4, but where Tomb Raider 4 was a good game that slightly suffered because it didn't explain enough to its players, Legend is a game that over-explains everything because it's terrified of leaving its players behind. Sure, using the RADnoculars is completely optional, so it's not too intrusive, but the game drops multiple hints to use these things that it can often feel quite the opposite.
Wow, this place is amazing. Might be a good place to use the rad mode of your binoculars.
You could be right.
But once you've reached the end of the tomb, you watch a short cutscene where Lara sees more goons, but this time they're surrounding a shrine of sorts with a familiar-looking pedestal on it. It's here where we learn that Lara got too curious and accidentally activated the shrine, which then caused a portal to open up, forcing her mother to perform her own version of a no-deal Brexit to save her daughter. And by that, I mean she pulls out only for everything to go tits up, leaving the younger generation alone to try and pick up the pieces years later. #satire. After that, the leader of these goons, a man called James Rutland in a lovely silk shirt, stops Lara from being shot and introduces himself like a Bond villain. He asks Lara if she's here because she's found a piece of the sword from the pedestal, shows her a piece that he has already, and then boards a helicopter with a mysterious white-haired woman before ordering his men to then open fire. Immediately, we're given control again and have to run across the rope bridge before taking out all of the remaining goons to finish the level. And then once we're finished with Bolivia, we're back at Croft Manor for a short cutscene and some exposition from Lara's colleagues.
You've heard of the Rutlands, right? From the States? Well, you just met the Senator's youngest son, James Rutland.
Ah yes, James Rutland, the man who had a blank monitor and a post-it note for a head.
Welcome home, Lady Croft. Will your hand luggage require emptying or filling?
No, but I do have something that you can help me with. Into the freezer, fuckface. The artifact that Rutland and his lovely silk shirt was holding is of course of great interest to Lara because she doesn't have it yet. So the plan is to follow Rutland to Peru after he previously mentioned somewhere called Paraiso and the name of a friend of Lara that she'd presumed had been dead for several years.
Who's Amanda?
Once in La Paz, we stroll down a small desert town and the scene plays out like a spaghetti western movie, complete with shots of closing windows, people clearing the streets, close-up shots of squinty eyes, and also a shot of Lara's nicely firm gun in its holster. The combat as a whole in this game is considerably more improved than in previous games. That's not to say that they were bad inherently. Well, a apart from Angel of Darkness, but it certainly improves upon them in ways that are really welcome at this point. Logging onto an enemy now displays a large reticule over them, allowing you to quickly and easily work out who you're attacking even after switching targets. You also now have the ability to dodge roll in 8 directions, which can be used both to avoid enemy attacks and as an offensive tactic to close distance. One of the cooler features is this ability to hold down the crouch button to perform a slide tackle, which you can then choose to either follow up with a melee attack that juggles them in the air, or you can jump off someone to trigger a special slow motion attack for extra damage and cool as fuck points. Soon afterwards, we meet up with Lara's contact, Anaya, but before the two can get properly reacquainted, Rutland's goons show up and you have to fight your way out of the town. An action-packed, if disappointingly short shooting segment then ensues, but afterwards you then get thrust into the first of 2 vehicle segments. Here you take control of Lara on a Ducati motorbike as you chase down the convoy that's attacking Anaya's car. These segments are relatively straightforward, no pun intended, and are at times pretty fun, but there are a number of things that make this a little frustrating to play on PC. At the risk of sounding a bit like Captain Hindsight, I don't think assigning acceleration to forward on the left analog stick was a good move at all. Having acceleration, braking, and steering all assigned to the same stick isn't great, but if this was something that you could easily configure in the options menu, that would remedy the issue entirely. The trouble here is that you can't. At all. Steering, shooting, and smashing into giant health kits are the name of the game, and it's super simple to do all of these things, especially if you're on console, where the controls make fucking sense. The vehicle section is essentially one long straight road with the occasional bends and ramps to jump from. Oh, for fuck's sake, Zip. Combat here is mostly automatic, with the only thing you really need to manage is when to shoot Puppy Pistol to make the bad man go away. This section only has 2 types of enemies on bikes to worry about, one with a shotgun and one with a machine gun. But as the game progresses, this escalates to include turret-mounted jeeps as well. But for this particular segment, it's just these 2 people. These combat situations really exacerbate the control issues I mentioned earlier on PC, as you're expected to maintain a certain speed to match theirs, shoot them, and then weave around the road to try and avoid their incoming gunfire. However, I found through all of my playthroughs of Legend that avoiding said gunfire was next to impossible while shooting them back at the same time. You not only have to maintain a certain speed, but also be close enough to allow Lara to lock onto them. As a result, I spent most of my time slowly tailgating my targets, which gave them ample time to pepper me with more bullets than Peter Weller in the beginning of RoboCop. Once you've caught up to the convoy and Anaya, you mount one of the trucks and then take out the driver by matrixing off the truck's cab and then landing into the back of Anaya's Jeep. 10 out of 10. Once the two arrive at the dig site, we then play a short flashback sequence retelling the events that caused several people and Lara's apparent BFF Amanda to die. You can tell, by the way, this is a flashback because the game now has a sepia filter with a film grain effect added for good measure. Nostalgia! Whilst exploring the caves below, an impatient Amanda carelessly runs ahead of Lara and ends up on the other side of a cave-in that separates the two. Unknowingly, the dig team have awoken a monster that then thanks them by going on a huge rampage throughout the ruins, killing them off one by one. This all culminates with a scene where Amanda dispels the monster after removing an evil pebble from a wall, with the chamber then beginning to flood. Right as they're both about to escape, Amanda's leg gets pinned under a rock and a large gate comes down to try and separate the two. Lara, of course, making full use of her gym membership, manages to use her incredible strength to hold the gate open, but she's still left powerless to help Amanda before having to watch her get crushed by more falling debris. The scene ends with her being forced to leave before she drowns, and the rest of the Peru level has us retracing her steps to fully explore the rest of the tomb. I suppose here would be a good time to talk about the swimming controls and how they're another great improvement from the previous games. In concept, they're not too dissimilar from one another, however, it's the execution here that sets it apart. Where before you had the tank control movement scheme to steer Lara around underwater, which often felt more weighty and sluggish, here you have a much more responsive and nuanced movement scheme that allows for a greater level of control. This eliminates the issue of navigating tighter spaces, where often you would get snagged on the geometry and have to spend precious time wiggling yourself free, and allows the devs to create more interesting areas to explore free of issue. While there aren't many underwater segments in Tomb Raider Legend, exploring them is thankfully now a painless task. This section in Peru is perhaps my favourite of the bunch. The texture work is fantastic and the lighting is really put to good use here, especially with the use of light shafts here that signify when you can come up for air. Once you've drained the water, you find Amanda's shoe, indicating that she did indeed survive, and then after passing through a hole in the wall where Amanda removed the stone, you enter the tomb's main chamber. Then after another quick-time event and a short physics puzzle, you enter a chamber to learn more about the game's primary MacGuffin that the bad guys are after. Turns out the artifact that Rutland and his lovely silk shirt was holding in Bolivia is a piece of the sword that may or may not be related to the legend of King Arthur. Recognizing the shard from a replica sword left in the chamber as looking the same as an artifact stolen from a Japanese university by the Yakuza, she then resolves to escape the tomb and find out more. Shortly after gunning her way out from the tomb and saving her friend Anaya, she gets Zip to arrange a meeting with Yakuza boss Takamoto. I just love that Lara expects Zip to just know how to set up a meeting with one of the most dangerous criminal gangs in all of Japan. Apparently in this game's universe, the Yakuza can just be casually called up in a manner akin to ordering an Uber driver, or how Roman Bellic calls you if he wants to go bowling in Grand Theft Auto 4. But lo and behold, a meeting is set up at a fancy business function in a high-rise building in Tokyo. So of course, with this being a function, Lara goes in dressed for the occasion. And
now we're going to have a useful conversation. It's turned out quite nicely.
holy shit, this fucking dress. This dress is just... how do I put it? You remember in my last Revelation video how I talked about feeling like her tits were gonna burst through the TV screen and smack me in the face? Well, they finally did. And I really don't mean to be crude at all, but holy shit, do they make her fabulous fun bags take center stage a lot in this game, to a point where it really becomes distracting at times. Her default outfit isn't bad at all, but when you see her casual outfit back at Croft Manor, it's just like, hello, boys! This section has you mingling with badly dancing party guests and meeting up with the party host and Japan's answer to Colonel Sanders, Nishimura. It's certainly an interesting change of pace to have her integrating with actual people that you don't have to shoot and be more investigative like an Angel of Darkness. But no sooner does this section arrive, we're immediately back to running around and shooting dudes again. The exchange between her and Yakuza boss Takamoto was a fun scene that really lets Keeley Hawes' Lara shine, giving us an exchange that just shows off how effortlessly Lara can switch between polite intrigue and brutal put-downs, really showing how she's always in complete control of her surroundings at all times.
I am not a thief, and you would be wise to avoid such accusations.
Then I suggest we skip to the negotiations.
I don't have any idea what you are talking about.
Of course you do. Just name a price.
Ms. Croft, are you deaf?
I don't know. Let's see. Try begging for your life like you did the last time we spoke.
The rest of the level's runtime is spent clambering around the rooftops of Tokyo in lace booty shorts and a ripped silk dress that's barely able to contain her excitement. All jokes aside, I actually really enjoyed this level quite a lot. It's one heck of an action set piece, having you leap across city rooftops trying to desperately not fall off to your death, whilst at the same time single-handedly storming a highly guarded Yakuza stronghold. Most of the platforming here has you precariously swinging across buildings using window cleaning platforms, ropes, and scaffolding planks to stop you from becoming deeply intimate with the Tokyo streets below. I really liked this level's aesthetic a lot, probably as a result of some personal bias from myself because I'm a massive weeb, but also because I think this level does the whole urban jungle concept better in some ways. One way is how Lara is able to directly affect the shape of the environment around her, using the magnetic grapple to drag platforms closer, or by using it to pull down gigantic fixtures to create a path to the next area. It's a lot more of a kinetic and flowing approach than the more labyrinthine and methodical approach that Tomb Raider 3's London levels took. And whilst both approaches have their pros and cons, Legends Urban Jungle was able to give the player a more believable environment to play in, with more architecturally sound level design. Then you steal a conveniently placed motorbike and use it to jump across a broken bridge via a QuickTime event, which if you fail leads to one of the more hilarious deaths in this game.
Lara, this is crazy people stuff!
Eventually, though, you reach the headquarters of Takamoto and get given your first boss encounter of the game. Takamoto is using a piece of the sword as a spear, which gives him the ability to throw around energy balls at you and Naruto run around the arena really fast. This fight is honestly pretty easy and really isn't that much of a challenge. You have a big room to fight him in with 2 separate floors, and you have to find a way to the top of the room in order to damage him. You can't stay at the bottom of the room because if you do, he has multiple gun turrets that rinse through your health completely. But once you do make it to the top, it's just a case of keeping him within range and avoiding his attacks. You can even run straight up to him and kick him in the face a few times if you want to. Once you've defeated Takamoto and taken his sword piece, you get a helicopter evac from Nishimura.
Thank you, Nishimura-san. I'm very relieved to find you here.
I am relieving myself.
You unsavory little
And set off to the next level in West Africa, specifically Ghana, in the continuing race against James Rutland and his lovely silk shirt. This place is beautiful to look at and is easily my favourite location in the game. The abundance of lush greenery combined with a massive flowing waterfall that's also surrounded by several more is just breathtaking to stand still and just take in, especially at 4K. Then to top it all off, you get to take a massive swan dive off a high cliff into a massive crystal clear lake below. Heck, even Lara herself can't help but praise the beauty of this place.
The water's absolutely perfect. I've missed Ghana.
Once we pull on this thing to reveal the hidden tomb behind the waterfall, we turn into a Saturday morning cartoon for a second with a short run-in with Rutland and his lovely silk shirt before venturing inside to explore the tomb. Inside we have some interesting physics-based platform puzzles that make use of Lara's new magnetic grapple and also tests us on our reaction skills. We also get more combat encounters with Rutland and his lovely silk shirt's goons, and here's where I started to notice flaws with the game's ranged combat system. See, the game allows you to pick multiple weapon types to use in addition to your pistols, like assault rifles, shotguns, and submachine guns. Instead of before where you could hold multiple weapon types in your inventory to switch around to, here they only allow Lara to hold one extra weapon that you have to swap out when you want to pick up another one. Most of the time you can take out enemies with just your pistols, but there are often situations that require something with a little bit more range. Thankfully, most enemies carry around these weapons to do just that, with several of them dropping SMGs or assault rifles when they die. The lock-on mechanic combined with the increased range these weapons give make Lara an absolute force of nature to be reckoned with. And you can even unlock upgrades for your pistols by collecting hidden bronze and silver and gold relics that turn them into the best weapons in the fucking game. Here's the thing though, this game has a manual aiming mechanic which you'd think would let you make more accurate and precise shots at range, but it doesn't. Well, it does. Let me explain. When you use this manual aiming, the game gives you this big fat circle to aim with that's pretty generous with what it lets you hit, honestly. Here's a section in Ghana where you've got multiple guards on the other side of this massive pit that has a rope bridge across it that can be destroyed. So the only way that you can fight back is to either somehow make it across this gap before losing your health, or use an assault rifle to pick them off at a distance. So I got to doing just that, and for some reason it wouldn't let me hit them, even though I'm clearly aiming my sight directly on top of them. It seems like this game has a maximum distance stat of sorts to dictate how far bullets from each different type of gun can reach. But unlike shooters that have mechanics like drop off to stop you from sniping people a mile away with a pea shooter, this game just has its bullets just disappear and stop when it reaches that maximum distance. It's kind of like the gaming equivalent of two kids LARPing, and then one of them continuously shouting, "No, that didn't count," to the other kid's attacks. But eventually I managed to gracefully and elegantly make my way across. Yes. Then, after dodging some giant boulder traps, we come face to face with Rutland and his lovely silk shirt again. Him and Lara have an exchange about the Galali key, which appears to be missing from this chamber, and is revealed to be the key to putting the sword back together again, with Rutland and his lovely silk shirt implying that Lara's father had found it some years ago, so she must have it back at Croft Manor. We then have an anime boss fight for a piece of the sword, only this time we have to use the environment around us to properly damage him instead of just shooting him. Essentially, you just need to destroy all of his wireless charging platforms that he stands on to recharge himself before being able to take him down properly. But once you've done this enough times to incapacitate Rutland and his lovely silk shirt and take his piece of the shard, Rutland then warns Lara that Amanda is at her manor ransacking the place to find the Galali key, like some kind of archaeological version of the show Finders Keepers. God, I think no one's going to get that reference. But no sooner has that threat to her house and her friends been made, it's instantly diffused with a quick call from Zip and Alistair.
God, finally. I've been trying to get through for ages. What happened?
This woman just saw her way through the front door. She had some sort of... I don't know what the hell it was. It was like black smoke.
I'll be there straight away.
No, we're fine. Look, I'll have to follow her. She's going for another piece of the sword.
Well, that potential moment of dramatic tension was kind of pointless, wasn't it? It kind of makes it seem like all Amanda did was knock on the front door of Croft Manor and asked whoever answered if they had this very important and vital artifact that they were looking for. And when they said no, she just kind of took them at face value and just went, "Okay, I'll try at the next door then. Thank you." Makes her seem about as dangerous as a pushy Jehovah's Witness.
Who's Amanda?
Next up, we have a chapter I like to call Lara Croft's subsequent level game to make benefit glorious nation of Kazakhstan. Here we're barging into an abandoned secret Russian test facility, which was used by Nikolai Tesla during the 50s and contains the final piece of the sword that Amanda is looking for. The first section starts you off parachuting into the base below, then massacring a group of soldiers with a .50 caliber mounted machine gun, just like me and my besties did on the weekend. Then once once you fight your way further into the base, you discover that Amanda's troops have hijacked a train and are on their way to the secret test facility. We tried to rush back to the train platform to catch it, but unfortunately we're too late and the train has already left the station. Thankfully, someone over at Ducati preempted this situation and decided to leave another conveniently placed bike for Lara to use to be able to chase down the train. And depending on what graphical options you selected on the PC version, what follows next is going to be a very interesting experience for you, let me tell you. The second and final vehicle section has you barreling through the harsh winter tundra in a mad attempt to board the train. You have the same biker goons from before, but now you have big black jeeps to contend with too. And for reasons that continue to both elude and amuse me, they all instantly decide to crash the moment you take out just their gunner. Just their gunner, nothing else. Once on the train, we get another QuickTime event where Lara dramatically avoids things, and the next section has you entering the abandoned Tesla research lab in search of the next sword piece. The toxic gas acts as a reason for players to require traversing above ground through certain corridors, and the electricity acts as both an obstacle and an inventive way to progress through the level. Once halfway through, you encounter Amanda, who's now gone full Kate Beckinsale, and explains that she's evil now because Lara didn't throw all logic out the window by going to look for a dead person. What follows is a series of electrical puzzles where you have a giant zappy gun to power up and have to find a way to do so in order to progress and find your way across that bridge. During all of this, Amanda hijacks Lara's WhatsApp group voice call with everyone and starts to taunt her about how she knows what the shards really do and that someone with such a brain as tiny as hers could never hope to comprehend its true nature.
You're so smart, Lara. Do you know why the Soviets called their project Carbonek?
It's the castle where Lancelot sought the Holy Grail. Not the first connection to Arthurian myth I've come across.
Myth, she calls it. A limited word for a limited perspective.
Once you've managed to work out that your magnetic grapple is capable of dragging electricity to the generator, you find yet another piece of Arthurian history that contains an inscription showing where the next piece of the shard is. Then, once you use version 1.0 of the Half-Life gravity gun to get across the gap, you then have a boss fight with Amanda's boyfriend? She explains that Lara and her can no longer be BFFs because the shadow demon from Peru slid into her DMs and they've since become inseparable.
There is no we, Lara. There never was. It was just me down there. Me and this. Do you remember it? I touched it, and it touched me back.
Okay, Amanda. Show me on the doll. The boss battle seems intense at first, but it's easy enough to work out that you don't actually need to attack him. All you really need to do is avoid its attacks and pull these levers on each side of the arena to make Tesla's balls drop. Then once that happens, you have to swing them about a bit until you're able to divert power from the machine and are able to hook the sword shard out from the middle. Finally, with that over, you're able to escape the lab through a conveniently located pipe. And whilst in said pipe, we get given the name of our next exotic location.
Zach, you're not going to believe where this leads.
Oh, you're going to find me extremely incredulous today.
Cornwall.
Yeah, you heard correctly. Cornwall, land of the pasty, and Devon. Home of cider, also Devon. But most importantly, the home of an abandoned King Arthur theme park that's built on top of an ancient crypt full of bladed traps, lava, and a giant fucking sea serpent. Also Devon. It's also apparently a place that's really triggering to Alistair, as each time I set off one of the park's dioramas, he'd get so annoyed and go into full, actually mode.
I'm confused. Weren't Excalibur and the Sword and the Stone the same thing? They were two bloody different swords!
Who's Amanda?
The irony is that this theme park was built off the discredited work of a professor who couldn't prove his theory that Arthur actually existed, when all it took for Lara to discover this super secret lost tomb of actual King Arthur was to just madly drive into a brick wall with a forklift.
Now this is better.
Through here we have yet another QuickTime event, more spiky traps, a section where you use some coffins as makeshift boats, sorry grandma, and eventually encounter the admittedly rather majestic and surprisingly intact looking tomb of King Arthur. You work your way to the top and find a way inside, and much to Lara's shock, the tomb has all the coffins of the fabled Knights of the Round Table, and of course the main man, King Arthur himself. Once you've solved the room's puzzle, you take the next piece of the sword and go to leave, but just as you go to do so, your team is held captive by Amanda's goons, and you have to fight a giant sea snake to get back to them. I know, right? Just another day in Cornwall. This fight is quite a satisfying one to play. Essentially, you have to once again make use of the surrounding environment to take the boss out instead of relying on brute force. Shooting these giant bells produces a sound that distracts the creature long enough for you to be able to drop one of 4 giant cages on its head. Once all 4 cages have been dunkachinoed, the creature becomes incapacitated and you can use his body as a platform to escape. On the way out, however, the creature comes back for one last-ditched attempt to stop you, but with the power of giant magical button prompts, you're able to grapple hook to safety. Unless you have the reflexes of a sponge, then this happens. On the way out, you encounter more of Amanda's goons as you work your way back through the same way that you came in, rearranging all of the blocks that you've been using to get by to make a new way through to the exit. Also, I'm pretty sure you're not supposed to be able to do this to cross the fire pits, but hey, it worked for me, so #lifehacks. Then once up and outside again, you free Zip and British Otacon from the tyranny of just one guy, and then the gang head back to Croft Manor. Once there, the team debate the mystery of the whereabouts of the Galali key and it not being anywhere in Lord Croft's collection. After placing 2 of the sword pieces together, Lara starts to remember that her mother's pendant, the same one worn by her during the plane crash sequence, looks strikingly similar in design to the rest of the sword. The trouble is that this pendant was lost after the plane crash in the Himalayas all of those years ago, so in order to find it, Lara is going to have to go back and visit the place that changed her life all those years ago. So off we go to do just that, and visit the game's penultimate level. Actually, I'd technically class this level to be the true final level of the game in many ways. The actual last level is just dedicated to a single boss fight and the final cutscene, whilst this place actually gives you an entire level to traverse. It is a level that offers the most challenging platforming of the whole game, with the majority of the time spent perilously suspended above bottomless chasms. I use the term challenging very loosely here, mind. This game is overall a much more casual feeling experience, and most, if not all of the platforming in this game feels incredibly simplified. I feel like this is in part due to the increase in movement automation than in previous games, where before you'd have full autonomy over Lara's actions such as ledge grabbing, turning in midair, lifting a leg to pee, and would have to observe the area to carefully plan each move that you'd need to make in order to progress. What a lot of people seem to forget is that the platforming of the older games was a puzzle in of itself. The games gave you all the tools you needed and trusted that you were smart enough to be able to use them without it needing to step in to help you, sometimes to its detriment, but mostly to its favour. Here in Legend, you no longer need to worry about telling Lara to do any of these things, as it's all done for you automatically, and all you need to worry about is making sure she's facing in the right direction. On the one hand, I totally get why you would want to streamline things to try and take away some of the more frustrating moments of the series, but as a result of this, it means that once you're familiar with how the game works, you really don't need to put that much extra thought into playing it. Yeah, you get moments where you jump to a ledge too quickly and the game goes whoa, whoa, before you simply press a button to get your grip back, but this and pretty much every action the game asks you to perform is mostly dependent on people having quick reaction skills than needing to plan in advance. This level is the true embodiment of this design philosophy. Most, if not all, of the obstacles found in previous levels make a return here, with some new ones thrown in for good measure to test what the player has learnt on their journey. But no matter if it's a crumbling ledge, a falling piece of the floor, a pole that snaps off, or a large downward slope, all of them serve to keep the player constantly moving forward, and nothing else. Even when you have to balance out the crashed plane cockpit to retrieve the brooch, you get a quick time event where you have to keep moving to escape from falling to your death. And of course, if you fail any of these QuickTime events, it's hilarious, especially when watching our illustrious heroine getting taken out by a flying airplane chair. Again, the design choice here is all understandable, and not inherently bad. It can just come off as feeling like you're playing through an interactive roller coaster at times, with very little time to stop and take things in. At the end of the level is another puzzle involving blocks. This time you actually have to work out how to lift this golden block to the top of the ledge to place it on a pressure switch. It was actually the first puzzle this game threw at me that I felt actually had to make me put some thought in to solve. So kudos there, Crystal Dynamics. What's funny about this whole level in particular is that we're all expected to believe that little baby boo-boo Lara and Mummy Dearest were all able to traverse this with little to no problems at all. Yeah, it could be argued back then the temple was more intact, but the geography from beforehand? Please. So here we get to finally see Lara reforge Excalibur, the very weapon that was responsible for taking her mother away in the same place where it all happened many years ago. And of course she's managed to carry all of these sword pieces in her tiny Gucci backpack, confirming a long-standing theory that I've had that Lara's backpack contains a pocket dimension that exists solely for storing things that she needs. Lara attempts to place the sword back in the same pedestal it came from all those years ago, but it instead causes it to shatter and crumble away, physically and metaphorically destroying a part of her past in the process. Now that we have the power of King Arthur, we can use it to escape the chamber. Then, after a very short escape sequence, the level ends, and it's back to Bolivia for the final showdown with Amanda and her shadowy BFF. This level is a boss fight, and a boss fight only, as we're immediately zapped back to the final area of the first level Bolivia with no other areas to explore or navigate through. I can't help but feel a little bit let down by this weapon. Yeah, it has the awesome power of being able to physically affect the environment around you, but it's just kind of limited to just being used in this level and as a weapon. Just think of how amazing it would have been if it had a practical application, like being used to power certain puzzles or something to be able to progress, or heck, even knocking down walls in previous levels to reveal completely new secret areas for you to explore. That would have been incredible. But no, sadly, all we can do with the sword is swing it around to kill a bunch of Rutland's goons for a few moments at the end and then use it to kill the final boss. It's incredible fun to use and feels like a really satisfying reward for reaching the end of the game. Swinging the sword not only hits enemies at close range, but it also launches a large energy wave that's capable of hitting targets at long range too. Just look at this fucking thing. It's so overpowered, it completely decimates everything in this arena. Just BAM! Slay 'em! Fa-fam! She just straight up doesn't give a fuck in this game, and I am loving it. Just look at what she does to Amanda's boyfriend, Rutland, and his lovely silk shirt.
Anyone between me and that stone dies.
Stop! I don't want anything bad to happen, but it will if you come any closer. James!
Amanda! See you!
James!
So now it's gotten personal, Amanda brings out the shadow monster for one last tango. The final boss is a fitting climax, with Lara hacking away at the demon's health bar to bring it down low enough so she can attack Amanda's weak point directly for massive damage. Each time you do this, the boss regenerates health, but the more you do it, the less total health it has remaining to replenish. Then once the boss is at low enough health, you land the killing blow and get the final cutscene. With Amanda out cold, Lara takes the gem controlling the demon and then places the sword back into the pedestal. Using the drawing she made as a child, she arranges the surrounding pillars so they all display the relevant symbols. Once done, she moves back over to the sword, and in a manner very similar to how she touched it in the beginning, she activates the shrine and opens a portal. This is where we get the game's biggest plot twist, as when Lara opens up this portal, I can pretty much guarantee that much like us, she wasn't prepared for what she was about to see.
Your daughter!
Too bad you will die.
Yep, it's her mother, and her mother is very much alive and well. But how is she still alive? Well, that's because this is the same Lady Croft from the very beginning of the game that disappeared after pulling out Excalibur in Nepal. So that means this isn't a portal through dimensions, but a portal through time itself. And those voices telling Lara's mother to pull out the sword and asking about her daughter were actually from present-day Lara and Amanda. Lara tries desperately to warn her mother not to touch the sword, whilst Amanda, who's regained consciousness, attempts to sabotage her by telling Amelia to pull out the sword. Ultimately, this is what causes Amelia to panic and pull the sword out, hoping to save her daughter, but instead she gets transported away to Avalon. Lara is understandably pretty fucking pissed off after finding out that Amanda was the voice from beyond that took her mother away all those years ago. And I think you know what's coming next. It's time to talk about that moment.
All these years I blamed myself, and it was you! You killed her!
Killed her? She's not dead! She went where I was supposed to go, where you could have gone!
Makes sense right this second, or I swear I'll execute you where you stand!
I told you to pull out the sword. I told you!
Where is my mother?
That shit will never not be funny to me. It's the delivery that completely sells it. She's so blinded with rage that she temporarily turns herself into Leonidas from fucking 300.
Where is my mother?
Avalon! It's not a myth. Don't you get it? You'll never understand. I'm wasting my breath.
From this moment, your every breath is a gift from me.
With that, the game ends, with Lara leaving Bolivia with Excalibur and telling her team to saddle up as there's more work to be done.
Tell him my father was right about everything, and there may still be time to do something about it.
And here is where I would normally say something along the lines of, and that was Tomb Raider Legends. But there's actually more to this game once you're done with the main story, and that's Time Attack mode. Yeah, for the first time in the series, we now have a different mode to play through here. Here in Time Attack mode, the goal is to rush through each level as quickly as you can in order to unlock cheat codes, more outfits, and something else which we'll get to later. Depending on how much you enjoy time trials though, your enjoyment of this mode will vary. Mostly though, I found them to be a fairly decent test of skill, though if it wasn't for me having to complete this for this video, I doubt I would have actually bothered to have finished them all. Though it does really highlight just how streamlined and simplified this game's level design really is. Sure, it could be argued that this approach is better for people who prefer it, but I'd actually argue it feels less rewarding to beat these levels quickly than something from the PlayStation 1 classics. Here though, it still requires some level of skill, but as long as you know how to press jump, move fast, what the puzzle solutions are, and remain partially conscious, you can easily breeze through most of these levels casually in no time flat. It's really that simple. Some of the costumes are outfits from other levels or palette swaps of existing ones, whilst others are completely unique or taken directly from one of the Angelina Jolie films. So if you've ever wanted to play as a badass adventurer in a charcoal pantsuit or Tim Burton's next wife, then this game has you covered. You can even play as Amanda during the main game, and suffice to say, doing this is quite the bizarre experience.
Hey, that's her!
Amanda? Damn it, Lara, I'm busy.
But what's the ultimate reward for 100% completion? Well, firstly, you get a cheat code that lets you turn the Excalibur sword into the Soul Reaver sword from Legacy of Kain, which is pretty cool. But remember when I mentioned earlier that Toby Gard left core design over creative freedom disputes, and also with issues that he had of Lara's portrayal as a sex symbol in the media? Well, at least none of the games before this one had her in not one, but 2 unlockable bikinis. Holy Christ. Yep, you heard me correctly. Your ultimate reward for finishing all of the time trials, collecting all of the secret bronze, silver, and gold collectibles, and pouring hours of time and effort into this game is a pair of bikini outfits. If you ever wanted the perfect counter-argument to anyone who ever says to you that the old Tomb Raider games were all about Lara's fun-sized derily triangles, slap them round the face and then point them towards this right here. Sure, you had wetsuits, and yes, Lara's assets got more pronounced in Tomb Raider 4 and 5, but these right here serve no purpose other than to give her less things to wear for our enjoyment. Heck, even as a tool for perverts it fails because you can only use them in Croft Manor. Remember when the whole nude raider thing was around, how horny gaming magazines were stumbling over each other arse over tit to publish the first totally legit we promise nude code for Tomb Raider? Well, this kind of feels a little bit like that, and I know it's not the same thing as one is outright nudity and this isn't, but you're still getting rewarded in the same kind of way, which is to see a sexy lady wearing less clothing. And Crystal Dynamics did that. Not cool design. Of course, you can circumvent this titillation limitation by installing a fan-made tool for the PC version called Startup Configuration Utility, a tool that lets you both select what level to play and what costume to wear. So if you're dedicated enough of a perv, Norsk, and are curious to see what wearing a hilariously inappropriate outfit would look like, then knock yourself out. Links in the description below. It also lets you wear the full evening dress outside of the Japan level, and here's what it looks like when you use it. Majestic. Which leads me nicely onto my next topic of discussion, which is the myriad of different versions that this game has. There's a version for the PS2, original Xbox, GameCube, Game Boy Advance, Nintendo DS, PSP, And finally, versions created for the Xbox 360 and PC, which is the version that I've been using to record all the footage that you've been seeing in the video so far. There's actually quite a surprising number of differences between the different ports of this game. Some are missing some things, whilst others are missing other things. But the PC version, on the other hand, whilst being the most readily accessible and easiest way to play this game in the modern day, has some of the most baffling shit I have seen in a long time. For starters, this port contains not just one, but two separate versions of this game, the PS2 version and the Xbox 360 version. Swapping between the versions is as simple as selecting the next generation content option in the graphics settings. However, that's where the simplicity of this action ends and the madness begins. For starters, it introduces completely new graphical errors like the ropes on this bridge in Bolivia being completely in the wrong place, this waterfall being present before solving the puzzle to turn the water back on, the skybox in Japan just flat out not fucking existing here, flashing mountains in the background of some levels, texture flickering pretty much everywhere, and perhaps my favourite of the bunch, which is having the floor textures completely disappear right at the end of the Kazakhstan bike section, meaning you just have to kinda guess where's safe to drive. Not to mention the still unsolved game-breaking bug that causes the game to just flat out crash in Kazakhstan with this mode turned on. Oh, and also controller support is broken unless you load the game from a script file so the Steam overlay works properly, but then to get the right button prompts you have to physically clear all the key bindings in the options menu so the game displays the right button prompts in the tutorial windows. So yeah, it's not great at all, and I'm really surprised this all somehow got overlooked before release, but thankfully you can just leave this option turned off and you'll be all the better for doing so. Unfortunately, the regular version of the game on PC comes with its own set of issues, though not quite as many, but still distracting enough to warrant talking about. Firstly, you still have texture flickering in some areas, which most of the time can just be ignored, most of the time, but you can also get characters completely changing faces right before your very eyes. Speaking of faces, what the hell is going on with this poor woman's face here? There are also some other oddities, such as Nishimura's sunglasses projecting the wrong objects in their reflections, King Arthur having two faces on his statue, and perhaps my favourite gaffe, a close-up of one of Zip's monitor screens which is completely blank and missing an image that should be there. It was here that I decided to look into the different versions of this game to find you, yes you, what version of the game that you should pick up and play for the definitive experience. And whilst doing some research, I managed to find some forum posts that detail stuff about editing textures. So with this information, I was just thinking to myself, you know what? If no one's going to do it, I'm going to see if I can do it and see if I can fix some of the issues with this port. Turns out with my extremely limited knowledge of texture editing and file modding, I was able to fix some of these issues. Not all of them, as the floor and wall textures are seemingly unfixable without direct access to a level editor of sorts, but the more noticeable and unavoidable glitches I've been able to sort. What's amazing is that all it took to fix these texture problems was to essentially find the offending texture and either make that whole texture a transparent image, like with the blonde Yakuza grunt variant bleeding through, or with Nishimura's glasses, just erase the section of the texture causing the problem, and hey presto, I even managed to work out how to fix that missing screen error by just simply erasing the monitor's black screen texture image, and then bam, there it was, all along, just hidden behind the screen. But I can't take full credit here, as this method that I used was originally found by a user on the Tomb Raider forums going by the name of A Tomb Raider Fan. So if you want to thank someone, then thank them for figuring this out, and all of the talented modders who made the tools to be able to do so. It beggars belief that some dumb idiot like me can just stumble upon fixes to problems that have been a part of this port since its release, when Crystal Dynamics' own developers could easily have done this themselves, and a lot better than me too if they'd cared enough to do it. The sad thing is that we'll likely never see this port properly fixed, or at least to a much better standard than it's currently in. I hope that by bringing these issues to everyone's attention that we might see more improvements or further fixes in the future. But for now, if you want the most visually consistent way to play this game, then I highly recommend seeking out the PlayStation 3 Trilogy version. That has all the visual benefits of the 360 port, but with further refinements and additional effects added to make everything look much nicer. All in all, I have to say that I rather enjoyed my short time with Tomb Raider Legend. It has a lot of confident James Bondy charm to it that breathes a fresh new life into the character and the series as a whole. It's the step the series needed to take in order to get itself out of the dark and troubled rut left in the wake of Core Design's last project and put it all back on track. The level design has definitely taken a bit of a step down in terms of complexity, but for what it lacks in this area, it makes up for with fantastic pacing and a greater level of accessibility. The story, whilst nothing too special, was compelling enough to keep me playing, and most of the characters were charming enough to be quite likeable. Keely Hawes' performance as Lara was very good in this game, and I took great pleasure in listening to her delivering savage one-liners and cheeky banter, and she has to be one of my personal all-time favourite incarnations of the character. Roughly a month after its release, Tomb Raider Legend managed to sell 2.9 million copies to people across the globe, with that figure jumping to an estimated 4.5 million copies by 2009. This made Legend the second best-selling game in the franchise since 1999's Tomb Raider: The Last Revelation, and at the time of release it was the fifth best-selling game in the entire series. So I think it's pretty safe to say that Tomb Raider Legend was a great success. With faith now restored in the brand and the game ending on a promising cliffhanger, fans were left hotly anticipating what would happen next in the series. Excalibur had been reforged, Amanda had been thwarted, and Lara's mother has been found to be alive and well, albeit in some kind of Arthurian retirement home of sorts. So you'd imagine the next game would pick up right where this one left off, right? Well, not exactly.
Lara